It was the most chaotic week yet in Parliament's continuing failure to come to grips with the public's vote to leave the EU.
So the noes have it, the noes have it.
I profoundly regret the decision that this House has taken tonight.
The Prime Minister has run down the clock and the clock has been run out on her.
MPs voted against the Prime Minister's deal, then voted against leaving without a deal, before voting to delay Brexit.
Division! Clear the lobby!
I've been reporting from this place for more than 30 years and I've never seen anything like it. Our nation is facing its most important decision for half a century, and yet it seems government and Parliament are unable or incapable of making up their minds what to do about it. Much to the annoyance of the people, politics is in meltdown. Of course, Europe has always divided politicians and parties like nothing else. In the 1970s, the Labour Prime Minister Harold Wilson got himself out of a tricky corner by handing the decision of whether to stay in the European community to the public with a referendum. David Cameron tried the same thing with less certainty and lost.
I do not think it would be right for me to try to be the captain that steers our country to its next destination.
Theresa May took on the job and decided to try and take the country out of the EU with as little input from MPs as possible.
As we leave the European Union, we will forge a bold, new, positive role for ourselves in the world.
But she was thwarted by the Supreme Court, which ruled against the government and in favour of a businesswoman named Gina Miller.
No government can expect to be unanswerable or unchallenged. Parliament alone is sovereign.
MPs now had the right to approve the deal to leave, but they couldn't agree on what deal they wanted. The Prime Minister called an election in the hope of strengthening her hand, but she lost her majority. In a hung Parliament, she had to strike a deal with the DUP to stay in power, but the Northern Irish Unionists haven't backed the government on Brexit. Nor have a significant number of Conservative MPs, mainly associated with the European Research Group, led by Jacob Rees-Mogg.
If we went ahead and held the vote tomorrow, the deal would be rejected by a significant margin.
Mrs May put off the moment of truth by repeatedly delaying a meaningful vote.
The parliamentary party does have confidence.
And she had to fight off an attempt by some of her own MPs to kick her out in a vote of no confidence in her leadership. With the clock counting down to Brexit Day, Mrs May had to call the meaningful vote.
The ayes to the right, 202. The noes to the left, 432.
She lost by 230, the biggest defeat inflicted by MPs for at least 100 years. Having failed to sack her, Conservative MPs then backed her in a Commons confidence vote to avoid having a general election. And then Mrs May lost again by 149 this time.
The noes to the left, 391. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock!
But she's still here and is planning to ask MPs to back her in yet another meaningful vote next week. This is not how British politics used to work. When a Prime Minister couldn't get laws passed, let alone deliver a central piece of their policy agenda, they packed their bags and resigned. But these are not normal times. There's no precedent for what's happening now. Back in the 1970s, Sonny Jim Callaghan's government fell 6 days after losing a series of votes in the Commons because Labour no longer had a majority. Callaghan lost the vote of no confidence by one vote, and a general election followed.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Is it a sad day?
In 1990, Conservative MPs were able to oust Margaret Thatcher as party leader and Prime Minister. John Major followed and was defeated over Europe, this time by his own Eurosceptic rebels. But he was able to face them down. Rule changes since then prevent Mrs May from taking the same way out. She can't resign the leadership and stand again, in spite of enduring the largest rebellion ever by Conservative MPs. Nor can she call a snap election because the Fixed-Term Parliament Act now applies. No Prime Minister at odds with their own MPs has ever had fewer options.
This is the time for this House, not just this government or indeed this Prime Minister, but for this House to give a lead.
Even when 139 Labour MPs rebelled over Iraq, Tony Blair had enough support across the Commons to win the vote outright. David Cameron was forced to rule out taking military action in Syria after MPs voted to reject his plans. His authority was greatly diminished, but he left it at that. Theresa May can't walk away on Brexit. 2.5 years on, all eyes are on Westminster, because nobody knows where we're heading. There's still no sign of agreement. Instead, it seems likely that negotiations will be extended. And the fundamental problems remain the same. Theresa May's plan is unpopular, her party is divided, so is Parliament and the country. These divisions have broken the rules that govern us. Until and unless they can be resolved, a big question mark will hang over whether our political system is fit for the challenges we face. Adam Boulton, Sky News, Westminster.